So we have a very special guest today. His name is Gabriel Aalst, and he is the NJSO CEO. He has worked very closely with so many great musicians, including some of my favorites like Joshua Bell, Murray Pariah, and he has worked with orchestras from all over the world, Australia, Britain, and then the USA. So we're very happy to welcome Gabriel for this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. Real pleasure to be here.
And we also have Larry Tamburi, who is the executive director of Newark School of the Arts. And he was also the CEO of NJSO. How many years back, Larry?
A while ago.
A while ago.
Yeah.
So, first, the first question is, I'm a performer, composer, and I'm also interested in arts management. You were also a performer at some point.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to see, how did that transition? Because how do you become interested in managing a symphony from a performer perspective?
Yeah. So I grew up playing violin and piano, and I'm from Sydney originally. You can tell from my very New Jerseyan accent. And growing up, I played violin and piano and played in the Sydney Youth Orchestra for many, many years, and absolutely loved classical music. But then when I went off to college, I actually did a law degree and a filmmaking degree, and made lots of mediocre student films and worked on a few television productions. Then ultimately, I want to say I fell into orchestral management, but as I was falling, I sort of turned it into a bit of a swan dive and made it, styled it out at the end somehow. So I had been working in production and in particular around touring of theatre and concerts around Australia, New Zealand, and even North America. And then I had an opportunity to work for the Australian Chamber Orchestra, which is, I think, one of the best orchestras in the world. The Times in London also thinks that. And it was a great opportunity to work really, really closely with fantastic musicians, travel Australia, travel the world, and the bug bit. And then after a couple of years there, for life reasons, I moved to the UK because I have an Irish passport, again, accent. And it was an opportunity to, go study abroad and live in a different country. And quite frankly, I swore that I wouldn't work immediately. I was going to take some time. And then the opportunity came up to work at the Academy of St Martin Fields, which, again, is one of these great orchestras of the world. And, the opportunity being this, in my view, a dinky Australian boy who loves playing violin and piano, to work at, the most recorded orchestra in the world with Sir Neville Marriner and Joshua Bell and Murray Pariah. Holy crumbs, I can't turn this down. And that's the moment when the falling into it turned into a bit of a swan dive, and loved traveling the world and working with the Academy, and then the opportunity came up to come to New Jersey with Shen, Maestro Shen Zhang, our music director, who's just absolutely incredible. And so that's a potted history about how I ended up here.
Yeah. That's yeah.
So you've worked in Australia, in Britain, and here in the USA. How do they compare?
In many ways, it's very similar. On a sort of product is a bad word in the world. The art is the same. The art is the same. I'm blessed to work with great musicians every day. And, obviously right now it's particularly hard, but, the thing that always draws me to working at a particular place is the quality of the music making. And, again, I mentioned her earlier, but, the prospect of working with Jen and working with the musicians of the NJSO was really enticing. In a bit of a back end, it's quite different. In Australia and the UK, there's a lot more government funding for the arts. Particularly in the world that I was working at in Australia, The Australian Chamber Orchestra is basically 50% funded by the government, which is very different from the NJSO. Here we get a lovely grant from the New Jersey State Council on the Arts, but it's nowhere near the 50% staff funding that I would get in Australia, which in turn has an impact on the work because you can take more risks artistically when you are less reliant on audiences. So that's interesting. And then across in the UK, whilst there is government funding, the way the Academy worked, we really didn't get a lot of government funding because we were on tour all the time. But then you're working with different, there are different pressures financially because rather than creating programs for your home audience as you would at the Australian Chamber Orchestra or the New Jersey Symphony Orchestra, where we see the same people in our audiences and we adore them and we know them. At the Academy, you're traveling the world and you're very rarely in the same city more than once or twice a year. So the way you program and the way you think about the art form is a little bit different. So those are sort of two examples of how there are similarities and differences between the work that we're doing. But ultimately, my job is to allow the musicians the ability to perform in the best possible circumstances to make the greatest art form for audiences that love them.
Well, that must be particularly difficult now with the pandemic and with all the social justice issues that are happening. So how are you coping, and how's the orchestra coping with those two big issues?
It's really challenging. The arts in particular have been disproportionately impacted by COVID, more so than many, many other industries. And symphonic orchestras in particular seem to be the top or the bottom of the iceberg. I don't know how we want to, which version of that we want to go with, but somewhere along either extremity of the iceberg, symphonic orchestras are there, for a couple of reasons. One, it requires a huge amount of people to put on a symphonic concert. And obviously right now, bringing people together is a real challenge. And then our audiences tend to skew older. So quite a lot of our audiences sit in the at-risk bracket for this particular disease. So we're sort of at it on all sides. But I'm really proud of the way that the NJSO has been able to pivot during this time. So quite early on, we talked to our musicians about creating a mechanism to produce all sorts of content at home. So basically from the beginning of COVID, we have been producing what we call couch concerts, multiple couch concerts a week. Some of them are musicians performing by themselves. Some of them are musicians performing with family members in their household. Some of them are musicians using digital technology to perform with themselves. And then sometimes we're able to bring them en masse together using, video editing technology. But this is a huge change for them because musicians on the whole are used to performing in the room. And if you know this, well, as an artist, there's energy that comes from performing with others, and you feed off others, and that, it's not even that. Obviously, with chamber music in particular, you're listening so much. With conducted work, you're watching the conductor and listening, and it's created a real need to change the way we think about how we perform. On the performance side, from sort of I don't want to call it business side, one of the advantages of this world is, typically the orchestra serves about 160,000 people in New Jersey every year. Now, we have a far bigger reach, which is incredible. And we have videos that we've produced during COVID that have been seen by more than 160,000 people. And I'm really proud of the way that the musicians have been thoughtful about creating content that resonates with so many people. And the tricky part now is how do we think about the future of that, and how do we integrate the people we're impacting digitally into our ongoing strategies and thoughts about what is a symphony orchestra and who are we serving, because that's completely different going forward. As for the social justice issues, the symphony is a community organization. We serve the community, we make great music, but ultimately, at least in my view, We are at the service of the community, and quite frankly, and this is my belief, and I know that I share this belief with many colleagues in the industry. Symphonic music has had a problematic history with race for a long time. In a very flippant way, you could say we celebrate dead white European men as excellence, and it's been very hard for us to break away from that perception of what excellence is. And that has been reflected with the pieces that are performed on stage and digitally, and also the makeup of the musicians presented on stage. And this is a time where I see society around us saying this type of behavior is no longer good enough. And I'm not talking about simply at the symphony, I'm talking about society in general. There's a much greater understanding of issues of systemic racism and how understanding systemic racism and the lack of understanding of systemic racism has continued to perpetrate these issues. So, at the NJSO, we have been dealing with issues of diversity and engaging with the issues of diversity, equity, inclusion for a couple of years. We set up, thanks to some amazing supporters, we were able to set up what we call the Colton Fellowship, which is a fellowship program for young musicians from Black and Latinx backgrounds to come and have the opportunity to play with the orchestra for a year or 2 years at full salary with full benefits to allow them the opportunity to learn from that experience and allow us to learn from them as well. That's a pea drop in the ocean of things that we can do. And I think that the social justice movement that's going on right now has opened up our eyes to the need for even greater change and understanding of the world that we're living in and the world that we probably should be living in. So thinking about what some of the things we've got coming up, going ahead, a lot of it is still in flux and I can't really talk about it, but certainly we have made internal commitments to having greater representation of Latinx and Black composers on our season, as well as guest soloists and artists. We serve on a number of cross-organization committees and advisory groups about diversity in the arts and also diversity in classical music. So, trying to take those ideas and understandings and bring them back to the organization. And, to me, there's radical change and there's fast change and authentic change. And I'm much more interested in engaging in authentic change, even if that doesn't necessarily mean we have a statement to say, these are all the 10,000 things we're going to do in the next week. It's called systemic racism for a reason, because it's a system that's in place and it takes a long time to unpick that. But we are trying to be intentional and purposeful in doing our part to change the way that our industry has engaged with race in the past.
Historically, symphonies have been kind of stuck in a lot of ways moving forward. And maybe an optimist might say that this is an inflection point where there's an opportunity for symphonies to take a breath and do something new going forward. So this actually could be a positive situation for orchestras in the long run, maybe.
Yeah, one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot during COVID is, by their nature, symphonies change iteratively. We have the way that we control the work that we do, we have a collective bargaining agreement, and by the nature of the way that those are negotiated, change happens iteratively. That's not a bad thing, it's just a thing.
Right.
And when I think about, symphonic music has been dealing with issues of relevance for a long time. To me, Bernstein signaled both this high point of a national, worldwide understanding of the importance of symphonic music, and also this strange tipping point where post-Bernstein, no one really sort of stood in those shoes and continued that household relevance beyond the audiences that we know and love. And actually, when I think about the way that people are engaging with our digital content at the moment, I think, wow, this is an opportunity to do some step change, not just on the social justice front, which of course needs to be done, but also in a general relevance moment. How can we learn from that? Because clearly there is a desire for the product we're creating, and perhaps it's the method of delivery that isn't necessarily resonating with a broader audience than we're achieving at the moment. And one of the things that, again, is factoring in playing in my mind at 3 o'clock in the morning when I wake up and think, oh my God, what is the future of what we're doing? I know that, and I wish I knew where this stat came from, and maybe it didn't come from anywhere and I'm making it up, but I think it's real. The average length that someone watches a video on YouTube is 6 minutes. Not average length. The average long form video is 6 minutes on YouTube. Now, that doesn't mean that people are watching only 6 minutes on YouTube. We all love a binge hole. We've all been there. But the way that we consume content now, the better or worse, is in 6 minute chunks. Mm-hmm. And there is an element of control there from the person experiencing the content. And how can we learn from that at the Symphony and factor that into how we create our work in the future? Because we want someone to go on, I want someone to go onto the NJSO's YouTube page and sort of fall into a YouTube binge, watch amazing musicians perform amazing music. And how can we encourage that environment, not just at the NJSO, but on a national scale, so that this is an art form that goes back to that joy that we had when Bernstein was around and, everyone went to the kids' concerts. How do we reframe it and create that for a new world? So anyway, those are some of the things I'm thinking about. Who knows whether we'll get there or not.
Yeah.
Newark is, so diverse. I have students from heritages from India, African American, Latino. There's Asians, so many different cultures. And they all have experience. All of my students have experienced concerts from NJSO, and they all come out of that concert taking something away from their own heritage. Last season you had the symphony orchestra with Indian music.
Yeah, it was fun.
And then you have piano concertos with African American composers, and so you're already doing a lot of inclusivity with the orchestra, and it's really having an impact on the students. Some of them, by the way, have become, just by their own wishes, have become subscribers of the NJSO.
Oh, that's
so
great.
You're doing definitely a really good job. Really great job.
I want to throw the credit for that has to go to two people. Shen, our music director, who certainly from my perspective, the idea when I was thinking of coming here, the NJSO was already so enlightened that we had a female music director who was a person of color. And that said to me, this is an organization that sees the future. And she's an incredible programmer. And then Patrick Chamberlain, who's our programmer on staff, who works with Susan, has been determined to, what you said is really actually quite meaningful to me, because I want everyone to be able to come to the Symphony and see themselves on stage. That's such an important thing. It's such an important thing for students. It's such an important thing for adults, kids, everyone. And, I think that's something that we as an institution have been trying to work towards. I am thankful for your praise, but I would say that we are nowhere near the end of our journey, and so much more work has to be done.
That's, and looking at that journey, I'm very excited to see, the future of NJSO. Our students are very excited too. So when will NJSO go back on stage? We have a date?
Ooh, that's a tough one. It's, plans are always evolving. And I guess the only constant to me in COVID is that I know nothing. And I can't find out anything. And so here's what I would say. It's the intention of the orchestra to collect together on stage and perform as an orchestra with virtual concerts starting relatively soon, so that we know that our audiences haven't seen us collectively together beyond 1 or 2 videos, which is shot in people's homes. We want to be back together. There's a couple of factors at play about that will define when that is. Obviously, safety is so important, and programming and as availability of concert halls and things like that, just to make sure that we can get in and be safe. Because ultimately, the safety of our musicians and our audiences are the #1 priority. What I would say is it's highly likely that you will see the orchestra together performing digitally before it's possible to have audiences in the hall. And we're beginning to see around the country different orchestras do this. And some orchestras are able to do it faster than others, and largely that's because of the local government restrictions. It doesn't take a genius to work out that restrictions in the South are looser than they are here in New Jersey, because we were one of the most hardest hit by this pandemic, certainly at the beginning. And the moment that we can be back together, we will be. And I hope it's sooner than we expect, and sooner than you expect, but at the right time to ensure that everyone is safe.
Well, thank you. Larry, do you have any other questions?
I could have a million questions, but I'm going to restrain myself.
Yeah, same here.
It's so interesting to hear all the different things that Gabriel has to say, and the symphony is clearly extremely lucky to have his leadership right now.
Oh, thank you for saying. And I'm only able to do what I do because of the brilliant people that came before me, Larry. And you are much loved in the symphony. And this is a cherished organization, and I think it means so much to you and all of us. So the most important thing now is we have to get through this crisis. And even in my darkest COVID days, I think to that moment where we all walk back into NJPAC and it's the first concert with an audience, and think how moving that moment is going to be. It's actually quite emotional thinking about it. And this orchestra has survived almost 100 years. We turn 100 in 2022. That means, a lot has happened in the life of the orchestra, and a lot will continue to happen in the life of the orchestra. And just our job now is to get back on stage and perform together. So.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah. Yes, thank you very much. And maybe we can send some of your digital performances to our audience, to our patrons and everything, if that's okay with you.
Oh, of course, absolutely. We have, there's some really great programs. Gradius Tibi is one that I would say that is worth sending out. This was a commission that we made from Jose Luis Dominguez, who is our youth orchestra artistic director. It was written for a socially distanced orchestra, and it featured the musicians of the NJSO as well as singers from Montclair State University Choir. And the piece was written as a thank you to first responders and medical workers. So that one in particular is very moving, but there's all sorts of great content out there. So
well, we'll do that then. Thank you.
Yeah. Wow, all right. Excellent. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Bye.